Montana Territory, August 1879, the first time she saw him. It was through the smoke of her burning barn. Kara Finley stood barefoot in the dry dirt, her nightdress streaked with soot, arms tight around her two children as the flames swallowed what little they had left. Her son, Kellen, clung to her hip, crying into her shoulder. Her daughter, Katie, only 5, stood silent, wide-eyed, the firelight flickering in tears on her cheeks. A shadow moved through the smoke. Bootsteps crunched gravel. Then came the low voice, steady, clear. "Ma'am, you all right?" Kara turned, half-blinded, heart hammering. The man who stepped into view wore dust-stained denim, a bandana around his neck, and a Colt holstered at his hip. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-worn face and quiet eyes the color of the riverbed. His hat was off, clutched in one hand, and his dark blonde hair stuck to his forehead. "I saw the smoke from the trail," he said. "Name's Trennen Fielding. I was riding into town, thought maybe someone needed help." Behind him, his horse shifted, tied to a fence that had somehow escaped the flames. Kara looked at the barn one last time. There was nothing left to save. "I need to get my children out of here," she said, breath shaking. "Please." Trennen glanced at the sky, still black with smoke but lightening in the east. "There's a cabin a few miles west. It's mine. You can rest there." "It's safe." Kara hesitated only a second. Her house was gone. She had no wagon, no neighbors for 2 miles, and her children were barefoot, coughing from the smoke. "All right," she said. "We'll come." He moved fast. Lifted Katie in his arms without waiting and helped Kara mount with Kellen in front of her. They rode hard through the dawn, Trennen guiding the horse by the reins, walking beside them the whole way. The cabin sat tucked in a stand of cottonwoods, simple but solid. A small corral out back split wood stacked neat under the overhang. Inside, there was just one room, a stone hearth, a cot in the corner, and a sturdy table. Trennen handed her a wool blanket and started a fire. "I'll sleep outside," he said, tossing his saddlebag near the door. "You all take the bed." Kara looked down at her children huddled beside the hearth, too tired to speak, too young to understand what they had lost. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. He only nodded. In the daylight, Kara saw him more clearly. He moved like a man used to being alone, quiet, efficient, always watching the edges of the land. She found herself watching him too. He brought her food from town: flour, beans, coffee, chopped wood before she could ask, fixed the back door when it stuck, never asked questions, never offered pity. He just stayed. Her children followed him like shadows. Katie sat beside him as he cleaned his rifle, asking endless questions. Kellen barely spoke to anyone but crawled into Trennen's lap without hesitation. One morning, while hanging wet linens, Kara looked across the yard and saw Trennen lifting Katie onto the fence rail so she could see the horses better. Kara smiled for the first time in weeks. That night, Trennen handed her a cup of coffee and sat beside her on the porch. The stars were out. The land was quiet. "Where's their father?" he asked gently. She stared out into the darkness. "Gone, left last winter. Said he was going to Helena for work. Never came back." Trennen nodded. "I'm sorry. I should have seen it coming. He never wanted a family. It was always me doing the work, raising them. I thought if I held on long enough, he'd stay." There was a long silence, broken only by the chirp of crickets and the soft rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. "You did not deserve that," Trennen said. "And they didn't either." She turned her face toward him. His jaw was tight, but his voice stayed soft. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Kara." Her eyes burned. She looked down at her hands. "I thought I was empty," she whispered. "Like I had nothing left to give." Trennen reached across and touched her wrist. "You are not empty." Weeks passed. The land turned gold as summer faded. Kara began baking again, biscuits, simple pies. She mended shirts, planted herbs. She found herself humming sometimes. Trennen never said much, but he was always there, fixing the roof, teaching Kellen how to whittle, holding Katie's hand as she tried to balance along the corral rail. One afternoon, Kara found herself standing in the doorway, watching him split wood in the yard. His shirt clung to his back and he worked without pause, sweat darkening the fabric. She did not look away. That night, after the children were asleep, she stepped onto the porch where he was sitting. "I want to stay," she said. He looked up at her, brow furrowed. "I mean here, with you. If you'll have us." He stood slowly, his expression unreadable. I have nothing to offer you, he said. No land deed, no money, just this cabin and a heart I do not know how to guard anymore. Kara stepped closer. I do not need guarding. I need someone who stays. Trennen looked at her for a long moment, then he reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing along her cheek. I will stay, he said. As long as you want me. I want you, she whispered. The kiss was quiet, like everything between them had been. But it was deep, real, the kind of kiss that said, I see you, I choose you, I am not leaving. The first frost came early. Kara moved fully into the cabin, her children already calling it home. They shared the one bed, blankets piled high, bodies warm. Some nights Kara would lie awake with Trennen beside her, his arm around her waist, his breath steady against her neck. I never thought I would feel safe again, she whispered once. You are safe, he said. By the end of winter, the snow was thick, and the stove burned day and night. One morning, Kara stood at the basin, washing her face, when a sudden wave of dizziness hit her. She gripped the table edge and sat down slowly. Later that day, while Trennen was outside tending the horses, she stood at the stove, hand resting on her belly. Then she smiled. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat beside him on the bed. I am carrying your child, she said softly. Trennen froze. Then he turned to her, eyes wide, hopeful, afraid. You are sure? She nodded. He stared at her, something breaking open in his face. He reached for her hand, then dropped to his knees in front of her. You will carry my child, he said, voice thick with emotion, and my heart, for the rest of our lives. Kara cupped his face in her hands. Only if you carry mine. He kissed her belly, then her lips, then her forehead. I love you, he whispered. I love you too, she said. And this time there was no fear in her voice. The wind had shifted by early March. It no longer carried the sharp bite of deep winter, but held the damp promise of thaw. The snow still clung in the shaded corners of the cottonwoods, but patches of earth showed through dark and wet and waiting. Kara stood at the edge of the clearing, her boots sunk ankle-deep in melting slush, one hand braced on her lower back as she watched Trennen repair a section of the corral fencing. The child inside her stirred low and slow, like a ripple across still water. She hadn't told the children yet. It felt like a small secret held between her and Trennen, warm as a coal banked in ash. Behind her, Katie's voice floated from inside the cabin, narrating some grand adventure to her dolls. Kara smiled and turned back toward the house. Later that afternoon, with the sun leaking orange through the window panes, Kara sat cross-legged near the hearth, sewing patches into Kellen's trousers. Trennen came in quietly, brushing snow from his coat, and crouched beside her. His knees cracked as he bent. Fence'll hold another season, he said, rubbing his palm where a splinter had pierced the skin. She reached for a strip of linen and wrapped it around his hand, her fingers moving carefully. You always know how to make things last, she said. He chuckled under his breath. I never had the luxury of replacing much. Her stitching paused. Was that true for your folks too? He shifted, leaned his back against the wall. My mother died when I was young. My father was a leatherworker, never much coin, but he taught me how to work with my hands. After he passed, I drifted, ranch to ranch, trail to trail. I didn't stay anywhere long. Kara looked at him. And now, Trennen tilted his head toward the next room, where Katie and Kellen slept under a patchwork quilt. Now I stay. That evening, Kara stepped outside to shake crumbs from the tablecloth. The stars were out clear and sharp above the trees. She stood there a moment, listening to the faint creak of branches, the distant hoot of an owl. Trennen joined her, pulling his coat close. You've been quiet. I've been thinking about names. Her voice was low. For the child, he looked at her sideways. You already have something in mind. I was considering my mother's name, Helen if it's a girl, and your father's if it's a boy. Trennen blinked. You'd name him after a man you never met. She turned to face him fully. I trust the man he raised. He reached for her hand, his fingers cold from the air. Then I hope he earns it. The thaw came fast after that. Rivers swelled with meltwater and the dirt roads turned to muck. Kara hung laundry on lines stretched between trees, the fabric flapping in the breeze, white against the budding branches. One morning, Kellen came running into the cabin, breathless and muddy up to the knees. There's a calf down near the fence. She's stuck in a ditch. Trennen grabbed his coat and boots. Kara followed, her heart thudding. They found the heifer flailing in a muddy hollow, her back legs caught in the soft earth. Trennen waded in without hesitation, boots sinking deep. Kara held the rope steady while he worked, coaxing the animal free with calm murmurs and steady hands. When the calf scrambled loose, Kellen cheered, his face lit up with awe. That night, over stew and cornbread, Kara watched Trennen help Katie untangle her braid. His gentleness was steady, unthinking, as if it had always been part of him, waiting for a place to land. "Have you thought about marrying me?" she asked, her voice quiet as the fire. He looked up slowly. "I have," she waited. "I didn't want to bring it up too soon," he said. "I didn't want you to feel cornered." Kara laughed once, soft. "I'm carrying your child, Trennen. I think the cornering's already done." He stood, crossed the room, and knelt beside her. "Then let me do right by you." "You already are," she said, touching his hair. "But yes. I want to marry you." He kissed the back of her hand. "Then we'll do it before the baby comes." They were married under the cottonwoods, just before the wildflowers began to bloom. The preacher from town rode in on horseback, shook Trennen's hand, and gave Kara a look of warm respect. Katie picked buttercups and tucked them into Kara's braid. Kellen stood beside Trennen, fidgeting with the buttons on his vest. When the vows were spoken, Trennen took her hands and said only, "You've given me a home I never knew I needed," she answered, "and you gave me one I thought I'd never find." They kissed once, and the wind rose around them, carrying the scent of new grass and damp earth. The land was waking, and so were they. By late spring, the baby had begun to press forward in Kara's belly, shifting her balance and slowing her step. Her dresses no longer closed easy, and Trennen stitched panels into the sides of her apron with a quiet care that made her chest ache. He worked by window light in the evenings, his fingers steady, the thread pulled smooth and even. One morning, Kara stood in the cabin doorway with her hand resting on the frame, watching the children dig a trench for their pretend river. The ground was soft from last week's rain, and Katie's boots were caked with mud to the ankle. Kellen was crouched low, showing her how to angle the sides so the water wouldn't spill too fast. Trennen carried fence posts out to the east line, his shoulders curved under the weight. Kara turned back inside, a slow breath catching in her lungs. She hadn't felt dizzy in days, but now the room tipped slightly at the edges. She sat down by the wash basin and waited for the air to settle. After a few minutes, the feeling passed. That afternoon, a wagon came up the trail, wheels creaking, mules slow and steady. Kara stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her skirt. The driver was a woman wide-hipped, sun-browned, with a scarf tied low over her braid. She reined in the mule and nodded toward Kara. "I'm Clara Root. Come from the west side of the valley. Heard you were needing some help before the baby comes." Kara blinked. "I didn't send word. Didn't have to. Word travels. My sister's boy works up near Gordon's mill. Said you've got 2 young ones, another on the way, and a husband spending half his days mending fence or chasing cattle." Behind her, Trennen came around the side of the cabin, wiping his brow with his sleeve. Clara nodded once at him. "I cook, I clean, and I don't get in folks' business unless asked. I'll sleep in the hayloft and take my meals with the rest of you." Kara looked at Trennen. He didn't speak, just gave a slow nod. "Come inside," Kara said. "We've got coffee on." Clara unpacked that evening a small bundle of clothes, a carving of a bird she said her father had made, and a tin box with dried lavender. She moved with the ease of someone who'd worked around families before, and by supper, Katie was sitting on her lap, asking if she could braid her hair like that. That night, with the children asleep and the fire low, Kara sat beside Trennen on the porch steps. She leaned into him, the side of her head brushing his shoulder. "I didn't realize how much I needed the help until she showed up," she murmured. "She carries herself like someone who's weathered worse." Kara traced her thumb along the seam of his sleeve. "Does it ever strike you how many people live with grief stitched into their seams?" Trennen didn't answer right away. Then, low, "I think about that every time I look at you." Kara turned toward him, her expression unreadable in the dark. "I was going to ride," he said. "After that night, I found your barn burning. I was headed out of the territory, didn't have a place in mind, just the road." "What made you stop?" He looked down at her belly, then back at her eyes. "You." The days lengthened. Clara settled into their rhythm without needing to be told. She taught Kellen how to trap gophers without breaking the skin and showed Katie how to make biscuits that didn't fall flat. Kara rested more, her ankles swelling by evening, her breath shorter with each week. One morning, thunder rolled in from the west, and the sky turned the color of river stone. Trennen brought the horses under cover, then came inside, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Kara stood by the window, watching the trees bend. "Storm's coming hard," he said. "I know. I can feel it in my joints." He hung his coat on the peg and came to stand behind her, resting his hand on her shoulder. "It'll pass." She turned toward him, her eyes darker than usual. "I don't mean the weather." Trennen didn't ask for more. He simply pulled her close, and they stood like that until the first strike of lightning lit up the fields. That night, with the wind howling and the shutters rattling, Kara woke to a sharp pain low in her back. She lay still, counting the seconds between the aches. Trennen stirred beside her, sensing the shift before she spoke. "It's time," she whispered. He lit the lantern without a word. Clara was already at the door, tying her hair back. "Boil water," she said. "And keep the children asleep." Trennen moved with purpose, fetching the clean cloths, stoking the stove. He didn't ask questions. He didn't leave the room. The hours passed in steady rhythm. Clara's voice stayed calm, her hands sure. Kara bore down through the pain, her fingers clenched around Trennen's. When the child arrived, the wail cut through the cabin like new wind. A girl, strong lungs, dark hair stuck to her scalp. Clara wrapped her in soft cotton and laid her in Kara's arms. Trennen knelt beside the bed, his face wet with sweat and something else. "I've never seen anything so fierce," he said. Kara looked down at the baby, her voice hoarse. "Neither have I." He kissed her forehead, then the crown of the child's head. "You'll carry my child in my heart for the rest of our lives," he said. Kara smiled, her eyes heavy with tears. "And you'll carry mine." Outside, the storm passed, the land stilled. Inside, the fire burned steady, casting long shadows across the walls of a home that had been built not by timber alone, but by hands that stayed, hearts that healed, and love that asked for nothing but the chance to last. By midsummer, the baby had grown into a soft-cheeked girl with eyes the color of uncut hay and the same steady quiet Kara had once seen in Trennen. They named her Marion after no one in particular, just a name that settled easy on the tongue and seemed to belong to her from the start. Kara carried her often in the crook of one arm while she worked shelling peas, brushing the hearth clean, sorting through bolts of muslin Clara had traded for in town. Marion rarely fussed. She watched the world with a patience that felt older than her months. One afternoon, Kara stood beneath the cottonwood shade with a basket of linens, her hands moving methodically as she pinned each piece to the line. Marion slept against her chest, wrapped snug in a sling Clara had stitched from an old flour sack. The breeze lifted the wet cloth, and somewhere across the field, Katie's laughter rang out like a bell. Trennen's hammering paused. He was repairing the chicken coop roof, crouched low with his hat drawn down to block the sun. He looked up, wiping his brow, then held Kara's gaze for a moment longer than usual. She didn't need his words. His eyes said enough. That evening, after the children were down and Clara had gone quiet in the loft, Kara sat cross-legged on the cabin floor, sorting through a basket of scraps. Trennen was at the table, sharpening a blade with slow, deliberate strokes. "You ever think about going back east?" Kara asked without looking up. The rasp of the whetstone paused. "No, why not? Tried it once when I was younger, didn't take, too many walls. Too many folks pretending they don't see each other." She nodded, folding a square of faded calico. "I was born in Missouri. My father ran hogs. We had neighbors close enough to hear when someone coughed wrong, but I never felt less known than I did in that town." He set the knife down gently. "Out here, folks don't talk unless they mean it." "Out here," she said, her voice low, "I learned what it feels like to be looked at and not passed over." Trennen crossed to her, sat beside her on the floor. He picked up a scrap of cloth and turned it once in his hand. "You don't plan to leave this place ever?" "I don't think it'd let me." She leaned her shoulder against his. "Besides, I've got roots now." The next morning, Clara caught Kara by the arm near the well. "You've got a letter," she said, holding out a folded paper. "Came by the peddler's boy. Said it was left at the post in town near 2 weeks ago." Kara opened it slowly. Her hands tensed as her eyes scanned the lines. Then she folded it again and stared across the field where Kellen was chasing a grasshopper. "You all right?" Clara asked. "It's from my cousin Hannah." Hadn't heard from her in 5 years. Her husband passed this spring. She's got 3 boys and no land left to work. Clara nodded once. She asking to come? She didn't ask, just said she's making her way west. Trennen was quiet when Kara told him that evening. He didn't question her or the letter, just asked how soon Hannah might arrive. Hard to say. "She's coming by wagon, might be weeks. I'll clear space in the loft," he said. "And we'll stretch what we've got till we've got more." Later that night, Kara sat with Marion asleep in her lap, the fire burning low. Trennen stood behind her, brushing her hair with slow, careful strokes. She closed her eyes, letting the motion settle into her bones. "You ever think you'd have this?" she asked. He paused, his fingers still tangled in her hair. "No, me neither." He leaned down, his breath warm against her neck. "But I'll protect it with everything I have." When Hannah arrived, her face was drawn from the road and her boys were thin, but there was still a flash of steel in her voice when she greeted Kara on the porch. "I figured if you could make a life out here, maybe I could too." Kara hugged her tight. "You're not alone anymore." The boys took to Kellen like they'd known him all their lives. Katie showed them where the best berries grew near the creek. Trennen built a second bunk in the loft with scrap pine, and Clara gave up her bed without complaint, moving into the stable with a cot and a lantern. One evening, Kara found Trennen sitting on the back steps, sharpening a second hoe blade. The sun was setting behind him, staining the sky rust and amber. "Feels like the house is fuller than ever," she said, settling beside him. "Does it bother you?" "No," she said. "It feels like it's growing." He turned the blade once in his hand. "You're making something solid here." She looked at him. "We are." He reached for her hand and held it in silence. The sounds of laughter drifted from inside Katie and Hannah's youngest arguing playfully over a game of jacks. Trennen glanced toward the door. "We'll build more rooms before winter." Kara nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. "And after that," he said, "we build whatever you want." The wind shifted, soft with the scent of clover. The fields were green now, the soil turned and waiting. And in the quiet, Kara felt it again, that deep, steady knowing that no matter what came, love had rooted here. And it would hold. The first frost came later than usual that year, but when it arrived, it settled heavy over the fields, silvering the stubble and biting through the cracks in the cabin walls. By then, the loft had been walled in with pine, giving Hannah and her boys a bit more room and quiet. Clara had moved into a lean-to Trennen built beside the stable, lined with wool blankets and cedar planks. She claimed the air helped her lungs and didn't mind the cold. Inside, the cabin was warm through careful preparation. Trennen had spent weeks hauling cut wood, and Kara had dried everything she could get her hands on: apples, beans, even strips of venison from a buck Trennen brought down in early September. The shelves were full, and for once, there was enough to share without stretching. One evening near the hearth, Trennen ran a whetstone over the carving knife while Kara stitched a tiny pair of wool booties. Marion slept in her wooden cradle, her breath soft as moth wings. Katie and Kellen were bent over a chessboard Clara had carved from fallen birch. The boys upstairs were already asleep. Kara's needle paused. "I've been thinking about schooling." Trennen raised his eyes. "For Kellen, for all of them. Katie's reading better than I could at her age, and your chess games are half the reason. But books won't be enough much longer." He rested the knife on the table. "There's a woman near Flatwillow, widow named Kershaw, teaches out of her parlor, takes in a few families each season." Kara folded the booty pair and set them aside. "Do you think we could manage the ride?" "It'd be near 20 miles. We'll make it work," he said. "I'll shoe the mare myself, hitch the wagon for twice a month. We'll see they get what they need." She leaned back in her chair, letting the warmth settle into her bones. "I never thought I'd be planning lessons again." "Not like this. You're building something lasting," he said. "Roots deeper than what we were given." That night, when the fire had burned low and the children were tucked in, Kara stepped outside, wrapped in one of Trennen's coats. The wind had died and the stars were sharp above the black branches. Trennen joined her, his steps quiet. He carried 2 tin mugs. "Rosehip tea," he said. Clara's idea, good for the blood. She took the mug, wrapping her fingers around it. Do you ever think about land of our own? He didn't answer right away. Then, I've been saving, not much, just coins from when I worked the trail and trading hides last winter. Kara turned to look at him. You've never said. I wanted to be sure first that this life of ours, it was real. That you wanted to keep building it. She stepped closer, setting her mug on the porch rail. You're the first man who ever gave me something without asking for more in return. I don't want more, he said. Just what you've already given. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper. She opened it slowly, a land deed. 40 acres east of the creek, a patch of bottomland they'd passed many times while gathering wild onions and milkweed. It's yours too, he said. The deed's in both our names. Kara blinked against the sting in her eyes. Trennen. I want to build a house there, he said. With a porch that faces west so we can watch the sun drop behind the pines, a barn with room for more than one team. A root cellar deep enough to last the worst winters. You, me, the children, our home. She reached for his hand, her palm against the calluses and old scars. Then let's start come spring, she said. And let's never leave it. The snow came early in November, soft at first, then heavy enough to bend the cottonwoods. They spent the coldest days inside, reading aloud, sewing through the daylight. Hannah helped Clara quilt new blankets from old shirts. The children took to drawing maps of their imagined homestead, complete with orchards, cattle, and a swing hung from a sycamore. Trennen carved a cradle for Marion that winter, one with smooth rails and a fox etched into the headboard. It was the first thing he shaped with his own hands for her, and when he placed her in it, she reached up and caught his finger with a quiet certainty that made him still. By thaw, they were ready. They moved to the land in April, the wagon piled high with tools, seed, and every hand willing to work. The soil turned dark and rich beneath their boots. The children planted peas and chased each other through the furrows. Hannah's boys cut fence posts. Clara kept stew boiling and bread rising. Trennen raised the walls of the house with help from 2 men he'd worked cattle with years before. When the roof was pitched and the chimney laid, Kara stood in the doorway and ran her hand along the frame. It feels like something we earned, she said. He kissed her temple. It is. Come midsummer, the house stood whole. The porch faced west, just as he'd promised, and every evening they sat with their shoulders touching, watching the light stretch golden across the fields. Marion had begun to crawl, her hands and knees forever dusty. Kellen and Katie helped with chores without needing to be asked. The boys upstairs had built a tree platform near the back edge of the pasture. One night in June, as the frogs sang from the creek and the air cooled, Kara sat with Trennen on the porch swing he'd hung from chains he'd traded for in town. She rested her hand on his knee. Are you content? He looked out over the land, then back at her. I'm home. She leaned in, her voice low. So am I. They didn't speak after that, not for a long time. They didn't need to. The wind moved through the grass in waves. The lantern inside the cabin cast a soft glow through the window, and in that moment everything felt settled, whole. A life built slow and deep, with hands that stayed, with love that asked nothing but to be carried forward day by day, season by season, into everything still to come, and they did, always together.